ToS. Welcome ToS. สวัสดีการะไมน์กับเซ็ตตุซันชาแนลต้นปะฮูปะฮูฮอดิซี่
What's up, everybody? It's your boy Andrew Esquire, American attorney over here in Inciting. And this is Legal Mindset, where we teach you to be your own judge. We're here today hanging out, and we're going to have a great one today talking about gatekeeping. We're gatekeeping all of you guys today. You all are being gatekept from the chat. You're banned. You're banned. You're banned. Danielle, ban them all. Professional gentlemen, ban them all. Let's ban them all. We're gatekeeping the hell out of all of you today. It's going to be great. But before we gatekeep all of you out of existence, we're going to talk about some Chads and Stacys that are absolutely based, and that is You Ate My Rice is a new member here. Thank you for becoming a member. Let's see. Kara Kalent, welcome as a member. And Zalthriz, welcome as a member. Appreciate you, brother. And also Alpha Omega said late and very, very Niji Sanji. To which all I'm gonna say is
Fuck you! Fuck you! Fuck you! Fuck you! Fuck you!
a lawyer will arrive entirely when he intends to arrive. But good to see everybody here today in the chat, hanging out. Also, shout out to the people over there on Locals, got that community up and running. So those people have gotten those notifications. And two more super chats here before we start. Patrick says, thanks for having Alicia on last night to talk about rigging. I've been wanting to start a book review channel and was thinking I'm doing that as a VTuber. Now that I know about her channel, I can make some progress. I am really glad that helped you. And I want to do more videos that I might put them in a actual playlist called like the professional series or like the VTubing professional series, because I want to invite more people on that are on the background. They're in the shadows of VTubing. They're not the VTubers themselves necessarily, but people that are creating models, people that are doing art, people that are supporting the VTubing industry, maybe doing merch, right? And talking to those folks to get an idea about the business as a whole, and also to support my thesis that it's a growing industry, which I do believe it is. But I'm glad you're making progress, and I'm glad that you know who to go to if you need some help or if you need to talk to somebody. So I'm very, very glad about that. Thank you, Patrick. Also, Syphilis says, Legal Mindset, super sponsor moment. Oh, yes. Help me recover from Amazon not paying me since 2016. I've made a book named Crafting the Sun. Now I publish for free on Amazon and on my Ko-fi page. Where do I send? Well, you can, if you want people to go check out your book, you can go over and go to Ko-fi, right? So people can look up your book, right? Crafting the Sun, and they can go check that out. So, I encourage people to check that out. Anybody who has a creative work, I am very much in favor of artists and people out there going out and creating their own creative works, particularly since the big companies are doing a shit job of it generally. Randy H says, gatekeeper, those who wish to destroy what you love. We're going to get into that definition today, and we're going to get into that with our guest, who is somebody that was recommended by you, the chat. I listened to you guys chat, and multiple of you guys, including one person who emailed me a lot, was like, you have to pay attention to this stream from Armchair Expert. I was talking about on my stream, my solo stream, about gatekeeping. And I realized when I was talking about gatekeeping that it's a nuanced argument. I kind of paused when I talked about gatekeeping. I'm like, well, it's good, but it's not. And I had trouble articulating it. And this absolute based furniture Chad gave one of the best explanations that I've heard of out there, really, period. Right. And that is, of course, the Armchair Expert. Welcome to the channel.
Hello. Thank you for having me on. I'm not going to lie. When you started stream, you just came roaring out of the gate. I had a huge smile plastered on my face just because I never get to start with that high energy myself, since with Australian internet, all of my streams start with me just testing to see if my internet's even working properly.
It actually, that's how it was for me in Manila. The Manila internet, it's hilarious. When you go to sign a contract, they tell you you're only going to get a maximum speed of a third of what you signed up for. And we only guarantee you 80% uptime. So we are telling you that it's going to be down 20% of the time.
Oh my, that sounds like a ripoff and a half.
It is, and it's very expensive. So I'm like, yeah, this isn't gonna work out for me long term. I'm not gonna be able to be streaming here because I need 100% uptime or near it, right? I can't deal with like having a multi-hour stream and half of it gets cut off because internet decides to be dog shit.
Oh yeah, for
So
sure.
but really thank you for coming on. I'm super excited to have you on. It's a great discussion. I've had this discussion once or twice with other guests. Once definitely with Arch. That was really a good conversation. But I want to refine it and particularly maybe apply it in the VTuber context like you did, because we had, and this is I think one of the big moments that you highlighted. We have this moment with HoloLive, with the Dodgers, right? With the normies, like here come the normies, so say everybody. Although I will tell you, like, yes, this is going to get normies in, but it's more of a slow trickle rather than like all of a sudden there's a flood and the fan base doubles, right?
Yeah.
But that said, this is going to get some normies into it, and this is, letting new people know about it. So it's questioning, hey, do we stop them at the gates, right? Are they the barbarian hordes at the gates? Do we let them in, right? Do we conditionally let them in? What is gatekeeping, and what is the difference between gatekeeping and, as I used to call it, being a dick, right? There's a fine line, right?
Yeah, for sure. Actually, I wanted to.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was wanting to ask you about your thoughts on something.
Sure.
Because when I looked at the way that this collab between Hollow and the Dodgers went, there were a few things that gave me the impression that, at least prior to the event actually happening, I don't know if the Dodgers actually took HoloLive that seriously as a business partner. And I was wondering if you might have gotten the same impression.
I really do. I actually think that they may have just thought this was something like for example, any other spots like Frito-Lay's or Gillette razors or something like that. Just, oh yeah, it's another sponsor, right? But I think when they saw what they put on and the level of show they put on and the turnout, right? I think that they now know, right? Like, oh, this is real. And I think one of the pieces of evidence that goes to your theory, though, is the fact that the merch line was understaffed. And I think that was on the Dodgers stadium side because they probably didn't think this was going to be as big of a thing as it was.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, that was one of the factors that fed into my impression as well. But also, actually reading through the LA Times article that you pulled up just then, I went through it with my chat in my previous stream, and it turns out that I don't think the Dodgers media trained their players to deal with interviews about the HoloLive collab either, because they went up to Yamamoto, they went up to Shohei Ohtani, and when they asked, do you know who HoloLive is? Do you know who Gura is? And they were all like, no, we don't.
No.
So, I mean, that's definitely changed going forward. Because there's something really funny about the idea that
they learned.
Yeah. That single event has probably Pavloved like at least a few tens of thousands of like middle-aged Americans into like associating Gura with winning in sports. So
that's true. That's true, because that was like the lucky charm there was Gura, right? Because I mean they were down, and then Gura came in and they're winning and they won. So they've got that kind of association there. And I said it on my channel. I said they could print so much money if other baseball teams picked up other VTubers from different generations and made that like a little VTuber cover corporation competition, right? You've got members of Hollow Justice over there doing one thing, got other people going around. You can sort them by either generation or color, maybe, because blue, they had a lot of the blue folks were in the Dodgers, so there's red and black and other colors you can kind of associate with different VTubers. It can print money, right? It can absolutely print money, and it can become this sort of secondary thing that layers onto the sport and makes it more popular, because now you've got fans that are VTuber fans that wouldn't be watching baseball, and you've got baseball folks that wouldn't normally be caring about VTubers caring about VTubers. So it is mutually beneficial.
Oh yeah.
Truly.
I mean, I could definitely see sports and VTubing heading into that direction in like, let's say, around like 5 years from now, or being thoroughly entrenched in that direction around 5 years from now.
Mhm.
And
And the
in
thing is,
general, sorry,
oh, go ahead.
yeah. Oh yeah, I was going to say,
Well,
in general, it's a kind of trend that a lot of people have been observing, that sports viewership does seem to be falling off a cliff a little bit. So VTubing is definitely one of the things that could revitalize that growing issue with just the way that media is broadcast. So
and they still have money, like the viewership is dropping, but they still have a lot of sponsorship money. They still do have money, the sports organizations. So they've got incentive to partner with, they've got some incentive to partner together, and they've got some reason to do that. And I think it could, like you said, breathe some life into that. And beyond that, the VTuber advertisers, they beat every other advertiser because they're live, right? They can go ahead and literally do it in real time. They can come on and they can make a pitch, they can react, right, in a real way, that if you have a commercial for Ford or a commercial for Coca-Cola, it's not reacting to the audience, but like a VTuber in real time can react, right? So that's a huge difference with what's going on with like traditional advertising versus potential quote unquote VTuber advertising. I think that the end of this, right, the scope of this can be so broad with sports.
agreed, 100%. Yeah.
I mean, they can have a VTuber announcing every player coming in. Now, whether or not the players want that, is one thing or another. But I mean, can
That
happen.
would be very funny to see, especially in some of the more like, some of the more, I guess, macho sports. It would be very funny, for example, like WWE, to see like Pipkin Pippa announce someone who's
Yes,
coming on. It's like a
UFC.
massively built muscle gentleman just walking onto the stage. But yeah.
Yeah, I could see like UFC where like Tenma's introducing, like, it could be, like Conor McGregor coming out to Pippa or something. Like, it would just be absolutely insane. But you know what? I can see it in my mind's eye. It's not like preposterous. It's possible. It's absolutely possible. I think, FaZe, since they're in Canada, should definitely look at hockey. I think that would be really good for them.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be very, I feel like that would take off. Yeah.
Also, people noting that Tenma does have a thing for like muscled guys. So yes, she's probably like salivating out there over over announcing a combat sport. Let's see here real quick. Let me get some of these guys. Wildcade says, did you see the Niji stock? Again, negligible. I haven't looked at any color stock, but I mean, like I said, it's been in a general bearish trend, so I wouldn't be surprised if it continues in its bearish trend. So let's just look at the 1 month chart. Yeah, it's still, let me show this here.
It is once again
no flash
dropping.
bang. Yeah, it's still bearish, it's in a bearish trend, right? Once again, you have to zoom out because it always wants you to look at the day, and it's like, oh my God, look, it's up. But then you zoom out and you're like, wait a second, wait a second, wait a second, wait a second.
Oh, this is such a painful graph to look at, especially considering like just the sheer amount of other things they could have done with the money they used for the buyback.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Like, this buyback was billions of, or sorry, millions of yen. Actually, no, sorry, billions of yen, millions of dollars, billions of yen. And they decided to throw it at this attempt at a buyback for what? So the stock could jump. Okay, it jumped from 23 to 28 or 2,800, and then it's all of a sudden right down almost exactly where it is, 2,400. 2000. It's very, very close to where it was. Meaning they literally threw their money into the dumpster.
yep,
They literally
pretty
threw
much.
their money into the dumpster. So good job there, Niji-sanji. Like, really good return for your investors that are not Riku, right? Because, by the way, Riku is one of the largest owners. So it really is just him pumping his own holdings.
Yeah.
Which I think we need to understand that. That's a huge factor. He owns a significant amount of the stock. So he is essentially pumping his own holdings.
That's always screamed to me as like a bit of a glaring conflict of interest when it comes to just using the funds that you've allocated to your business properly when you are a major shareholder like that. Because again, all of these buybacks, like, it's a very cynical business maneuver. But I think if he didn't own as many shares as he did, people might have been able to sort of just write that off a little bit more than they are right now. Because again, it is a bit of a glaring issue that is always very prescient in people's minds when they look at stuff like this. So,
right.
Yeah.
Let's see. Alien says, "Let's go." That's my chairman. Chairman.
Hello, Alan.
Generic Wolf says the final score was "Ya go." Wildcat said, "When was the last time the Dodger Stadium was full?" I don't know, actually. I don't know. Probably it's been a while. I mean, baseball is one of the more declining sports. I'm not going to lie, because it was meant for an era where people would just sit around. It was their social outlet, right? People knew everybody. You'd talk. It's very slower in pace. It doesn't really keep up with the ADHD generations, you know. Now there are people who are interested, especially people from other countries, do like baseball. I mean, Japanese love baseball, and you know, some of Central South America loves baseball, right? But yeah, Dodger Stadium, you just look at the numbers and say, look, we can keep doing this, you know, and you've got more VTubers. Rare Recruit said, "Can I get a birthday shout from Make24?" Rare Recruit, happy birthday, you absolute chat. Thank you for hanging out on the channel, and we appreciate you. Keep on raring. Weird says, Face Connect can sponsor medication.
I'd love to see Face Connect Pharmaceuticals. That would be such a banger. A banger brand partnership.
If it's like Phase, now sponsored by Pfizer. Mark said obligatory. What did I miss? We're just getting started here for a second. Weird says Tenma can be Mr. Universe announcer NMA. She would love that. Imagine if Iron Mouse, Jinxie and Queso fan says, imagine if Iron Mouse was the WWE. That'd be great. That's what I'm telling you, guys. These are banger ideas, and they will make money. Like, which is why eventually corporations are like, you know, we can do this thing. And Trip Tech finally says, legal mindset. It's illegal to segregate by color in 2024. Oh, I'm sorry. You know, they're trying to repeal those laws in America. So we may have those laws repealed in the next 10 years. Who knows? Oh, and Hobby says right here, can we do this for the Mets? VTuber Grimace. I mean, the point is they would do it for everybody, right? They would do it for everybody. But yeah, you could definitely see the mascot of the Mets. Let me pull him up real quick. This guy is pretty much already VTuber approved. Like, you can easily make this guy into a VTuber. Like, this is their mascot, you know?
Oh dear.
Yeah. Like just some dirty purple blob. Like, that definitely fits well in the VTuber sphere.
My only knowledge of Grimace so far has been the Grimace shake meme that was pretty big on TikTok all those months ago.
Yes.
But yeah.
Yes. Oh, and Alien says, if you must know, any color sponsored a race course. I believe it was Riku specifically. So I think Riku specifically owns a racehorse or has a share in a racehorse. So yeah, I mean, that's about as expensive as a yacht. So there you go, guys. A racehorse is extraordinarily expensive. All right, so Armchair, let me just ask you real quick. How did you get into VTubing? How did you find out about it? Like, about when and kind of what drew you into the VTubing sphere and, like, you know, an enjoyer of VTubing?
So I think I have probably one about like the most like stereotypically normie entrances into VTubing, where I was first immunized to the idea of VTubing because a friend recommended that I check out anime when I was like way into my like early 20s. So I did that. Then at some point I started watching content by a creator named Maxor. People in the chat, if you don't know who Maxor is, he basically makes highly edited, bordering on epilepsy-inducing video game reviews, or as he puts it in an early interview that he did, edited musicals, but for video games. And because he
This dude-
has like a hellish upload schedule, like once every like 2, 3, sometimes even 4 months. And because I was starved of content, I started watching VTubers who were reacting to his videos to like, tide
Mhm.
myself over in between. And that's how I got into VTubing, because I would check out these VTubers. I would think, okay, this is a cool, like, at first I was like, this is a cool gimmick. And then I started seeing clips, and then from there it was I started watching Face Connect, and then it was all over.
Yeah. Once you've gone down the face rabbit hole, you're done. You're
Yeah.
it's over. It's
Yeah.
over. Can I ask, do you have favorites?
In Face?
Or in general, or in face? Can you you don't want to disclose? I mean, it's okay. It's okay.
I mean, it's not favorites as much as just like people I end up watching more often, more usually.
Often. Yeah, fair enough. More often.
Yeah,
Sure.
like Pippa, Sheena, Jelly, those are Lumi. So like right now I'm kind of just bouncing in between those 4 most of the time.
Okay. Sounds good. Jay says I could see Pippa Face Connect either doing medication brands or medieval, and then
medieval MMA and Face Connect would go so hard.
Be so crazy. I love it. Mitchie Loudy says, get Doki Bird to collab with WWE. She has already has WrestleTuber as part of wrestling. This is what I'm telling you. They've already and you can find VTubers that love that sport. That you can find VTubers that already are interested in that sport or love that sport, or have some interest in it, and link them up, connect them, right? It works so naturally, and this is why I think this industry is going to expand, not contract, right? Because as they make those links, particularly between East and West, because I do understand it's hard for these insular Japanese companies to collaborate with American brands, and to a certain extent, and we're going to get into it with gatekeeping, we worry when they do that, right? And we'll talk about that.
Yes.
But I think there's a way to collaborate without necessarily taking on the same ideological commitments and other commitments of the Western brands, right? So we can get into that. Charan says Alias Enano with V4 Mirai loves WWE. Oh, okay. I don't know. I didn't know about this VTuber, so now I know about a new VTuber, Alias Enano. Okay, cool. V4 Mirai. All right. So getting into gatekeeping, and let me just pull up your initial slide here. So this presentation, and actually before I pull up the slide, let me pull up your channel, right? So for those that want to go over and see it from the tap, from the source, right, you can go over to Armchair Experts channel. This is not you. There's another Armchair. There's too many.
My name is so bad for search engine optimization. Because when I made it, I only realized immediately after I locked it in that there were like 2 other creators with that name, and one of them happens to be an entire podcast. So
yeah, and so that it automatically goes. So Armchair with a 1, you got to get that 1 in there, right? Armchair with a 1, Armchair Expert, got him over here, right? Now you've got a scheduled future stream where you're going to go more in depth on it, right?
Yeah.
And you've got
when I talked about the first time, it was a bit of a last minute addition to a stream that I scheduled for something else, and this is just me going into it, like just dedicating an entire stream to it, introducing more media concepts and such.
And I believe the one that, have you clipped it out? No, I believe the one that you were talking about it was either this one or this one. The September.
It was the yapping about BetterHelp.
Yeah, yapping about BetterHelp. These slides, what we're going to go over today, is all included in this. I just want to go over it more in depth, and also have a chance to ask him questions and kind of like probe a little bit deeper and have a little bit of a rumination on what he presented, right? Because I think it's very good, but I also want to expand upon it, right? So he's going to have another stream here, and I like you guys obviously go subscribe to him, follow him, and then get on his stream. Say you came from Legal Mindsets channel, right? And then if you want to see what he already presented, you can go over here. It's a segment of what he presents, right? But it's a very good segment. It's a very good segment. All right. So here are the slides, and here's the first one that he presents here in his thesis about gatekeeping, which is not all tourists are bad and not all gatekeeping is good, right? Now, these statements work both ways, right? So this statement works as it is and also works in the inverse, right? So it would work as not all tourists are bad and not all gatekeeping is good. And it would also equally work as not all tourists are good and not all gatekeeping is bad, right? The inverse
for sure.
Right. So this is a good thesis that starts out and then jumps into your definition of tourist here. So perhaps, Armchair, if you could maybe present this information, I'll ask a little bit of questions.
Sure. So, thing that's common across pretty much all tourists, regardless of what intentions they walk in with, regardless of whether they're good or bad, is that both types of tourists initially enter a space just because their curiosity is piqued. They find something that they find there's something that they find to be engaging, interesting, whatever, and then they might not have close attachments to either the subject matter and or the people, or in most cases both. But they do have something that catches their attention. And the real separation between these two groups happens once they start engaging with the community and with the subject itself. So the thing is, with a good tourist, they will approach the subject matter with an open mind and no judgment. And the reason why that is really important is because when you do enter a new space, when you start interacting with new people, every community, every just group or culture or whatever will have its own idiosyncrasies in the way that it interacts with other people. They'll have things that have an appeal that is not immediately obvious or not quite common sense. A really obvious example of this in VTubing is, for example, lollies. So a lot of people
that's the most controversial one, right? And,
yes.
and like, because lollies is like, let's say that's one, or beyond this, actually, for me, something more innocuous, which is less, maybe it's more debatable case by case, is, for example, talking about past lives, right?
Yeah.
So like that's a taboo that in any other area, if there was a flesh tuber, as they call them, or just a regular streamer, and they had another channel, it wouldn't be faux pas for you to say, oh yeah, they had this other channel, right? That's very normal. That's quite normal. And a person coming into the space wouldn't know that, hey, maybe they worked with this corporation and they don't want to talk about that. And if you do talk about that, you've now committed a taboo in the areas of some people you're completely yeeted. But obviously, yes, lolly is way more big of a debate, right, in terms of the inflammatory nature and going outside of just the VTubing sphere.
Yeah, for sure. Because I mean, when it comes to just the way that VTubing is perceived outside of like the VTubing space, lolly does unfortunately play a big part in that like general impression, because that does tend to be the part that people tend to pick up on more if they're not familiar with VTubing as a whole.
Yes. Or anime as a whole, right? I think if they're kind of newer to anime, they really like don't pick up on that, and they automatically assume, and I think you said this, the assumption is it's a sexual thing, and it always is a sexual thing. And it's not just that this is something cute and innocent and like funny, right? It's they can't accept that fact that, right, something can just be like cute and innocent and funny and doesn't necessarily have to be sexualized, right? And of course, on the internet, there's always going to be people out there that are going to go and what is it, rule 34 or whatever, they're gonna, there's always those people out there. But aside from the consistent fact that those people are out there no matter what, right, I think the majority of people that, in my thought is, in my opinion is, the majority of people that do enjoy that content are not approaching it with a deviant eye. And look, when I see a VTuber with a lolly avatar, right, I don't necessarily assume deviance, right? I assume cute and funny generally.
Exactly. As much as people like to go with the "whoa, Kanye" memes, it's really just for a lot of people, and this is why I do feel like it's almost a crime how grossly underrepresented this type of appreciation is. It's just nice to see something like, small and cute exist in front of you, because it taps into that sort of fuzzy, warm, sentimental part of your brain that a lot of people by default switch off when they just go out into the world and interact with other human beings. So
Yep. And people are saying in the chat, cute and funny. Yep, it's definitely a thing. Definitely true. Oh, let me read this one here. This is actually good. JV says, Robrigado says, one thing I've noticed is that many normies conflate anime with hentai and thus associate it with sexual deviancy, which makes the assumption about lolly even more right. So you're jumping straight from anime to hentai, and then obviously VTubing, which uses anime type avatars, you're going to jump all the way there, right? So that's, I think, an assumption that a lot of people make. And I think even Armchair, you said that when you first got into it, you were kind of a little bit of that mind.
Yeah. When I first started watching anime, I did go into it with the okay, this is just for people who like jack off to like 2D stuff, etc., etc. And I did kind of wander in with that kind of mindset. So I am very thankful of the fact that
gooning 24/7.
yeah, exactly. I am very thankful of the fact that I did not have a Twitter account when I first started watching anime, because I would have been insufferable at that period of time.
Yes. That's where a lot of people still are. They're still in that insufferable mode. Oh man. So okay. So the difference here is, right, so you've got the good tourist that can, that approaches it with an open mind and no judgment. And I think this is very true. I try to approach a lot of things with as little judgment as possible. It's very hard to get to zero, but as little as possible. And to discern and articulate, this is huge, right?
Yes.
To be able to say, this person good, this person bad, or this thing good, this thing bad, discern different aspects, what appeals to them, what doesn't appeal to you, what type of content you like, what type of content you don't like, if you don't like unhinged content, or if you love unhinged content, right? And then this last one, to be able to coexist with perspectives other than your own. A big one might be, you might be in a chat enjoying a VTuber, and maybe there's people in there that are of different political perspectives, or different ideological commitments, right? And you're able to enjoy the thing with those other people, right?
Oh, for sure. Or
So
even something.
No,
Sorry.
go ahead.
Even something as simple as just like, for example, the reason why that last point is, sorry, the last 2 points, I think you rightly pointed out as being really important, is because even when you're just watching one creator, a VTuber, a creator, just like any other human being who is performing as a job description, there are going to be many aspects to what they do, what they say on stream, especially, and to their content that might not necessarily gel with one another on paper. So, like, let's say, for example, that you have a VTuber that does ASMR content while also doing the kind of like casual streams, like collabs, let's plays, etc., on the side as well. And let's say you're someone who is vehemently against ASMR, partially because you don't enjoy it, partially because you're uncomfortable with the parasocial aspect. You need to be able to coexist with other people who are there purely because they enjoy that kind of content as well.
Right.
And the moment you have that kind of, you can't reconcile yourself with that kind of friction, even within the same fan base for the same creator, that's when things tend to like kind of fall apart. So
yes,
yeah,
absolutely. And I see that even with channels where you have people who, for example, I'll cover different cases, and those cases may have focused on different things, right? So there might be somebody that was really interested in my coverage of Disney, for example, but really didn't care about Amber Heard versus Johnny Depp, or vice versa, right? Really cared about Amber Heard versus Johnny Depp, but doesn't care about one thing or the other. And they try to influence you. I'll receive messages from people saying, hey, I really like this thing you do, I don't like this topic you cover. And my general response is, of course, for my channel is, hey, look, I'm covering what's breaking, what I think is important, and what people are asking me to cover, a nexus of those things. But you'll find that some people will be okay with that and tolerant to that, say, hey, I understand you're okay covering these things. And some people will demand that you change and that you only do the thing that they want, right? Yep. Because they do not want anything else but what they want, and that's the bad side, right?
Yes.
Now, about the bad side. So I do agree with you on the commonality of they're interested in the subject matter. I guess the difference to me here is why they're interested in the subject matter, because I could say that for a good tourist, you might be genuinely interested because, for example, if it's VTubing, you just like anime.
Yeah.
As a bad tourist, your interest might stem from the fact that you maybe hate anime, and you want to, you want to influence this thing to be less like anime, right? Or to be less Eastern and more Western, right? That might be your agenda, right? But that still is an interest, right? It still means you're interested, but the why is different.
Yeah. And to that point, I do think that you are right about the fact that an interest could be either positive or negative. Like you could be motivated to be interested in something because you love it or because you hate it. But I do also think that that same interest can apply to good and bad tourists alike. Because it's very possible that someone comes into anime with the mindset of, oh, I hate this. I hate how I see it everywhere. I saw it at my baseball game yesterday and it didn't match the vibe at all. And then they go and check it out. They actually sit down, watch it with an open mind. And then they go, okay, this is like actually pretty good. So I do think that while you are right about that, it's still like a commonality between good and bad, rather than a difference, I suppose.
I actually, you know what? I will say to a certain extent, when I was asked about VTubers before I knew what they were, I was like, oh, I'm probably not going to like that because it's streamers, and streamers are probably, they're probably being annoying, and I prefer to keep it purely to anime. Like I didn't even know about it. Like I just didn't. In my mind, I like negged it a little bit. But then as soon as I actually watched VTubers, I was like, oh yeah, no, this is absolutely amazing. So you're right. You might go into it with a little bit of a negativity, but if you approach that with an open up enough mind to just try it out and listen, and that's where you're open, right? I think you are willing to be converted over and become a very good tourist who does open up and is able to, be a discerning, helpful part of that community. Versus on the other side, by the way, the bad tourist being somebody who comes in with contempt and prejudice, right? So I see this a lot in many different communities, saying the fans are toxic, saying the fans are XYZ.
That's always a good one when it comes up. Just calling everyone in the space toxic with no sense of no specifics, no segregation between like good and bad behavior.
Single fan is toxic, right? You're all toxic, all of you, right? And then saying, look, we need to purge, which is the cannot exist. We need to purge everybody else out of the fandom, which if I look at a fandom, and this is one of the good comparisons you brought up later when we talk about perversion, but Disney, right?
Yes.
And I think about Disney Star Wars, and I think about, for example, who is watching The Acolyte right now. And other than the God bless them, the reviewing channels on YouTube that are forced to watch these things because they need to put out the this is so bad review. Other than those guys, it's really just the Raylos and a very small amount of that group they were kind of catering to. And they've kind of gotten it. The bad tourists have kind of won, right?
Yeah.
And they've kind of taken over and said, no, we own this now, and we've gotten rid of all these nasty people, right, that had these other perspectives. W for us. Of course, that's an L for the franchise, right?
Yeah. That touches on something that I started thinking about once I announced that I was going to do another gatekeeping stream, because people started suggesting different communities, different franchises, etc., that have tried to gatekeep their communities, etc., to varying degrees of effectiveness. And one thing that really affects how effectively you are capable of gatekeeping something, I do think it depends on what it is you're actually trying to gatekeep. So, like, obviously, the easiest thing to gatekeep is an event, because you can restrict that, like, physically. But then when you think about something like a franchise or like an industry, that becomes a lot more difficult, because with a franchise, sure, it can be how easily it can be gatekept depends entirely on the IP holder. So if the IP holder decides to like sell their IP and then they sell it to the wrong corporation or the wrong people, then it's just over, because there is no securing the integrity of the fan base that gathers around your content if you can't even ensure the integrity of that content. So
and so that's what makes it, to me, like, let's gatekeep VTubing becomes a ridiculous argument, because literally you not only have to gatekeep corporations, which, look, an individual corporation could control its policies, it control its people, it could even say, hey, if you mention XYZ, we're banning you from the chat, right? We're not allowing XYZ type of people at our events, right? We're going to sue people for defamation. If you come negatively with, this type of approach, or if you slander us, we're going to be very aggressive with defamation. There are things you might be able to do as an individual corporation, but because there are so many indies with so many different viewpoints, there's indies that are politically conservative. There's indies that are politically liberal, right? There's indies that are from all different sorts of countries, right? It is absolutely, to me, impossible to gatekeep the entire industry of VTubing. Yes, an individual VTuber could do it with their individual audience, yes, but not as a whole, right? I mean, we're on the same page.
100%. Yeah. Although I will make one tiny stipulation to that, where
Sure.
the only times where I do think it is possible for an industry to gatekeep itself or to be gatekept is if that industry is dominated by a monopoly. And that is generally, as a consumer, as an audience member, whatever, that is not what you want. So again, like as large as Hololive becomes, etc., I think it's reasonable to always hope that there will at least be like a competitor, or at least ideally a few like genuine viable competitors, because monopolies are just generally not good for any industry, and yet that is the only time when it is possible to gatekeep an industry. So yeah.
There's a lot of super chats now. Some of them are going to be relevant. I'm reading some of them here, and some of them are relevant stuff we're going to bring up later. I will mention. We'll cover a couple of them here before we move on. Mechanus Golden Gear says 2020 200 history class, and then the VTuber craze brought together the world. I don't think it's going to bring us together. It's going to lead us into warring nations between different VTubing like corporations. Like America, like North America is going to be like for phase, like the Niji sisters are going to be holding out like Japanese World War II holdouts on the islands of the Philippines and Indonesia. You're going to have like cover corporations like Pan-Asian monopoly. It's going to be crazy.
Someone in chat said the Waifu Wars. That's such a banger title for a history textbook entry.
It's so good. It started with Asuka and Rey and ended up in good stuff. Azahara, what's up, brother? Said, I wonder if Niji had that one gate as a teaser because they gate kept their potential EN audience.
Oh no.
Oh, they really hate their English audience. I'm not gonna lie. Wildcade says everyone is a tourist. Exactly. So to me, when you say keep out the tourists, you're like, wait a second. We want these people. I want these people. I want the good people, right? And all of you, every single person at some point started out as a good tourist, right? Because everybody is a tourist at one point. There's no other way in. There's no other way in, right? Like you discover a thing. So it's really random to say, okay, you're going to set an arbitrary point in time, and if you got in before this point in time, you're in, and if you didn't, you're not. That doesn't make any sense to me. Funala says OG anime fans had a motto: yes, lowly, no touch. But everything changed when the normies arrived. I personally blame 9gag for popularizing the pedo bear memes. I don't know if to me, pedo bear was always a joke to me, but I was always like, whatever, that's just a fucking joke. But I get that, like, there's a broader internet conversation, and that kind of inflects in on the industry, right? So, and sometimes the industry can get judged, or the area can get judged by its worst actors, by its literal worst actors, which are just a handful of people. Wild Kids and lolly haters who conflate lolly with sex should ask themselves why. Moby, that default reaction is telling. Maybe, yes. Sometimes, for example, the people that accuse other people of things often are the folks that, the three fingers pointing back at themselves, right? When you point at somebody else, they're often the people I ask the question about. Mark Daniel for 5 says, is there a spectrum between good tourist and is not good at the discernment and articulating, but can coexist? So, okay, that's a good one, Armchair. For this slide, do you think there's a spectrum between good tourist and bad tourist, or do you think it's a binary?
I think it's a little bit of both. So generally, there is a spectrum in terms of the attributes that good tourists possess. But what you kind of have to look for is that with a good tourist, to qualify as a good tourist, as ironic as that
Yep.
phrase might be, you do have to have at least some of those attributes. So it's okay if you are not capable of articulating something, as long as you walk in with an open mind, like, or you walk in with no judgment, or you're capable of coexisting with different perspectives, you will be fine. So among the good tourists, there is going to be a spectrum of like which people possess most of those traits versus people who only possess, let's say, 1 or 2 of those. But there is a visible separation, and a clear separation, I do feel, between good tourists and bad tourists, in the sense that a bad tourist will not have any of those traits.
Right.
Because
so like
generally it takes you not having any to really be a bad tourist, in my opinion.
Well, to have contempt and like, if you cannot both have an open mind and contempt and prejudice.
Exactly.
Right. Like,
Yeah.
these two things cannot coexist. Right. Now, I can see how you might slide from one to the other, right? It can go either way, right? But I don't think you can kind of coexist totally. I do agree though about the articulation, right? I mean, you could be like, you could be autistic or something and have a problem articulation, with especially social articulation, right? Like, that's very possible. But as long as you're able to coexist and keep a general open mind with minimal judgment, you meet the criteria. You're within the spectrum of a good tourist. Right? Let's see here. There's a couple that made me laugh here. Oliver Closeoff for 5 Canadian says, "Hey Andrew, I'm a good tourist. I only ship Luke and Han, and Luke."
What the fuck?
Star Wars is going where no man has gone before. After all, I fucking hate you guys. Oh god. Hell says, "I like it when you cover Pippa and only Pippa." Glory to Pakistan. I need to somebody send me a good, so Pippa stands. Send me a good Pippa reaction clip, because I've got like a Tenma. Like, I've got the Tenma here, which is like here.
Hello, what up, nerds?
But I don't have a Pippa, and I feel like that's actually like a shame. Send me, like, it's got to be less than about 5 seconds. But if you got a good 5-second reaction clip of Pippa, please send that to me. We need some Yabbit in here, just to trigger people. Bobert Bobertson says, "I don't know if you hit the subject already, but Warhammer 40k is one of the newest targets in come in and convert and purge tactic." I think we'll get to Warhammer, because there's a point at which I think I wanted to make about Warhammer later, but I won't forget about Warhammer. It definitely is one where, and I'm sure you may want to talk about this on your stream too, Armchair, when you talk about different communities and their success fighting people off. It's one where I see it could go either way. It's on the precipice, right, in the tug of war, which we're going to get to in a second. And Matt, I want to answer yours later. I see your super chat. I'm going to answer it later when we talk about the shield, right? I'll answer it now. I don't see enough tourists acknowledge that Avatar is both a shield for anonymity and privacy, as well as a vehicle for branding. The difference between the chair and, say, Rima is culture. Yeah, so Armchair, the difference between you right now as an avatar and a person, even Gura, right, is literally just the avatar itself, right, and what she intends to do with it, right, the presentation that she's using her avatar as a vehicle for, right? But the anonymity and the privacy is a huge value. I mean, to me, I look out there and, look, I'm happy to be out here in person. I'm not scared of anybody, but people have done some nasty things and said some nasty things because I put my identity out there, right? In terms of attacking my family, attacking other people, right? Stuff that's actually pretty fucking nasty. And, if I didn't live in Asia, I would expect that by this time I would be swatted, right? People would send nasty things to my home, and stuff like that. I think people are underestimating the avatar in that sense, and understanding that that's why the culture behind the privacy of VTubers is so sacrosanct.
Yeah. When you look at the whole premise for the entire VTubing industry, at its core, I would argue it is that concern over privacy, which is why when you think about all of the different crimes that go on in VTubing or the different taboos,
Crimes,
the crimes in quotation marks, yeah. So
Well.
as much as general shit slinging and bad behavior is looked down upon, nothing is regarded as egregious as a sin as doxing or anything that might approach that territory. At least that's what I've noticed from watching various controversies go down. So it very much is like baked into the DNA of VTubing.
Yeah, doxing is, to me, doxing is almost an attempt on, I mean, I say it's almost an attempt in murder, but it's certainly a directed attempt to harm you, whether it's through your job, right, through your family and friends, through your significant others. Because if you have a wife, a girlfriend, or a boyfriend, whatever, it applies for men and women, right, and they find out that weirdos on the internet are like looking at where you live, like they're probably going to be concerned, right? They're probably going to be maybe scared, right? And not unreasonably so. Big Turkey's based for hold on, I gotta play the clip here. Super absolutely.
Hello, beso de pato, man.
Thank you for the 50. He says it's not so much the average tourist that's harming these fandoms, malicious or otherwise, that's concerning. The greatest red flag is when tourists are applying for high positions right out of the gate with no vetting. What do you think about that, Armchair?
I think that's spot on. Out of all of the, I think we'll talk about this a bit more later, but out of the red flags that tourists are beginning to take over a space, or that a space does not have sufficient measures in place to guard against bad tourists, is just that. The idea that they get handed positions really high up on, like, managing the content, managing the people who make that content, but they themselves do not have a thoroughly established understanding of the context behind the content and the context behind the audience that enjoys it. So
someone mentioned localizers. Yeah, localizers definitely are one of those that get in that, because they also, it's not just even applying for, they view themselves as having a high position right out of the gate when they may not even have liked anime or enjoyed anime or been somebody who's been exposed to it.
Actually, could I just interject for a second?
Sure.
That touches on a larger point that I do think I didn't quite include here, because I don't think it's that essential, but I do think it's a very big defining difference between good and bad tourists. And that is the ability to have at least some degree of respect for the people who've just been there longer. And I say that not because I want people to sort of like, bow down, bend over, and mindlessly fillet like traditionalism or whatever. When you enter a space, I mean, like, one of humanity's greatest assets and weapons is the ability to retain and pass on knowledge. And when you enter a space and you instantly decide that you're going to disregard the opinions and thoughts of those who've simply been there longer, they've spent years. And this is why I have like huge respect for creators like Parrot, like Pippa, like False, like Rima, like Depressed Nasagi, because they've dedicated years and hours of their life at a time to just keeping their finger on the pulse. And when you enter a new space and you decide in that split second, okay, I'm going to build up all of this knowledge all on my own, combine that with the tendency or the need to impress the knowledge you presume to have on everyone around you, and you get a perfect cocktail for the worst of tourists. So yeah,
absolutely. And that's, I think that's the thing, is assuming versus taking a beat to listen, right? Taking a beat to listen to these folks and saying, hey, maybe I don't agree with everybody, but maybe somebody knows enough and to share with me, right? Maybe there's people that I might disagree with or have a different take on, right? But there's somebody out there who I can identify with, learn from, and gain knowledge from, and they might be able to help me on this journey in this community, right? And so, take a beat and listen to them. Ulfer Broder says 40K is falling to Slanesh. Yes. Michilati says an example of good gatekeeping will be Blue Archive, with Hoyoverse on the other hand. Never understood why gatekeeping between Genshin and Star Rail. Why am I not allowed to enjoy both games? Yeah, very interesting. I will say I'm not a huge Hoyoverse person, at least on the lore and culture side. I actually have done a lot reading the contracts and the legal side of Hoyoverse, right, which is interesting. But yeah, So now I feel like we need to get to the next slide here, which this is kind of one of there's so much going on here in this slide, guys. There's so much going on here, but this is one that I was very, very blown away. They're all good slides. But this one, you've managed to articulate the good and the bad here, but I want you to kind of walk us through what's going on in this particular model. Obviously, you can see generally it's a tug of war between between bad tourists and the old guard, right? But just walk us through what's going on here, Armchair.
Yeah. So the way that you can think about the way that a fandom or an activity or an interest or whatever is defined is that you can conceive of it as a constant tug of war between people looking to change it simply for the sake of changing it and people who have enjoyed it and try to keep it or maintain its status as of the present. So those are the old guard, right? You have purists, OGs, and converts. Now, purists are people who insist that the best form of something is its most basic iteration. So these are people like unicorns, for example, or people who believe that, like, for example, when it comes to VTubing, that everyone should either be Japanese or like just a fan of Japan, that they should be idol-like in the way that they operate, etc., etc. And these are people who are also prone to being unwelcoming to new people coming in.
Yes.
Then you have the OGs. So these are just people who've been around the longest. And after that, you have converts, who are basically good tourists that have come in and then integrated into the fan base.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
So converts that's very clear. Convert is a good tourist that is integrated into essentially the old guard faction.
Yes.
Right? Because you can stay permanently if you wanted to as a kind of spectator or good tourist who's just enjoying the thing without engaging in any sort of debate or any sort of support for either side of this ideological battle, really. That would be somebody who just likes and subscribes to the Oshi. They watch Gura, right? They maybe buy Gura merch, whatever, but they're not getting in there and saying, oh yeah, they should be collabing with the Dodgers or they shouldn't be, right? They're not getting in there on one side or another of the argument. They're just saying, hey, look, we're here enjoying our thing, right? And you could stay here forever if you wanted to.
And I'm actually really glad that you brought it up, because the main thing that defines that sort of transition from integrating from just being a good tourist into being a convert is your ability and willingness to articulate what it is you like about the thing you enjoy. Mm-hmm. And articulation is the main force that both sides are using to pull the rope in either direction. Sure. So this is a tug of war where the first side to run out of proper means of articulating their thoughts and feelings loses. As Ellen pointed out, like in the middle, you have good tourists and spectators. This is the side that, as a byproduct of this struggle, both bad tourists and the old guard are kind of fighting over. And the reason why good tourists and spectators are so important is because a good tourist can kind of, in addition to just like, sitting aside and watching this whole thing go on, a good tourist can also integrate into either side. And you never want to lose a good tourist to just like, being turned off to your fan base simply because, actually the way that I put it originally was, when instead of dedicating yourself to articulating what it is you enjoy about your particular area of interest or hobby or whatever, that is the equivalent of taking one of your hands off of the rope, digging into your pocket for a gun and trying to shoot the other side. Sure, you might hit, you might miss, but regardless of what happens, you've reduced your ability to pull. And as a result of that, on top of that, good tourists might be put off if your default way of defending your fan base, your community, is just generalized vitriol and personal attacks.
Do you think that goes both ways though? Because obviously, a lot of times, bad tourists are pulling out the gun and shooting, saying, "You guys, the old guard, you guys are the ists and the phobes and the et cetera, right?" And of course the old guard shoots back and says, "No, you guys are the ones that are, ideologically XYZ, right? But that has nothing to do with the whether Space Marines should be female, or whether male and female VTubers should collaborate, right? Or whether VTubers should just speak Japanese, right?
Yeah.
That has nothing to do with one thing or the other thing.
And if both sides are if both sides devolve into that kind of shit slinging, that's when good tourists and spectators as a whole tend to get turned off from the entire fan base. And
They
that's
just walk
a
away.
loss. Yeah, exactly. That's a loss, because you lose people who have no idea of what they're missing out on, and who otherwise might have been integrated and become a core part of your fan base. So on the other side, you have the bad tourists. These are people who are segregated into 3 main groups: perverts, activists, and inquisitors. Now, perverts. When I say the word perverts, a lot of people will think of sexual deviants, right? So
well, hold
again,
on.
people,
I gotta cue it here. I gotta cue it here real quick.
Disgusting.
Go ahead. Proceed. What do you really mean by pervert?
Yeah, so when I say perverts, I mean perverts in the most literal definition of the word. People who seek to corrupt the nature of a thing. So, for example, the largest perpetrators of perversion in any fandom are not people. They're not the fetish artists that are only interested in making Rule 34 of whatever the main draw of the community is. It's corporations who seek to pervert the nature of the thing by just turning it into a mode to gain profit and nothing else. So when I talk about perverts, that's what and who I'm referring to. Because fetish artists are part of that group, but they're not all of it. Yeah.
And I'm going to put a pin in the comment about corporate in general, because there's a point I want to make there, but not right now, because you bring up that a couple times. But I do agree with you, though, that they often are the ones that want to change it for a commercial purpose. And because not only for a commercial purpose, but because they have so many external strings, any given corporation has so many things pulling on them, including, as it's famous now and everybody knows, stuff like DEI or Bridge, etc. Right? They've got all these things pushing them, including economic interests, personal interests, right? So in the case of Niji Sanji, we just talked about Riku having a substantial share of stock, right? That is a way that is perverted away, because now when he's looking at this lens, he's looking at, how do I personally make money? How do I enrich myself? How do I buy another car, another yacht, another racehorse, right? So you've got all these other strings that are attached to it, which have nothing to do with the original, nature or interest itself, right? They're aside from that, right?
Actually, in that point, to touch on what Baked Turkeys brought up before, another red flag when it comes to just the idea that bad tourists are winning in a space, and this doesn't have to be an industry or franchise-wide thing. This can even just be in the scope of a single company, for example. A really big red flag is when the way that content is made, when the way that a company operates, especially in a talent-centered industry like VTubing, when the shareholder meetings start to become the focal point of just the way that they operate in general, that's a really big red flag, because that means that, again, the people that the content centers around, the creators, the VTubers themselves, have become sort of secondary in focus to just the goal of making money. And that's when things can really start to slip. So,
and look, I want, okay, I'll bring it up now, I guess, which is I do genuinely believe that in many cases, having a business around something, having even a corporation it has the potential to be good, right? It can allow something to reach a broader audience. For example, just because if I'm an indie VTuber, right, I don't have the economy of scale of a corporation. I don't have somebody that's doing my marketing, that's doing my advertising, that's helping me with my model, that's helping me with rigging, that's helping me with branding, right? With helping with my channel, my social media. So the amount, if you just look at it too, in terms of numbers, right? The ability of a corporate VTuber to get to hundreds of thousands, if not, eventually millions of subscribers, right, is obviously due to both support, network effect, etc. So there are positive things that a corporation can do. But at the same time, you have to acknowledge that these corporations also have these other interests, which very easily pervert it. I guess what I'm trying to say is, when I was listening to your thing, I was saying, okay, yeah, I agree with you, but not all corporations necessarily end up being evil, right?
Yeah.
Now they might start out, by the way, you might start out not evil and then become evil. I think of the famous Google motto, right? Don't be evil, which they actually removed as their motto.
Yes.
Which should concern everybody, but yeah. You could start one way and end up another, but I do agree with you as a general thesis, right? As a general thesis, yes, I do agree. Corporations have the number one incentive, reason, and historically, you bring up Disney. That is probably the best point, right? Of somebody that wanted to exploit it for money and agenda purposes, and has completely failed that, but they definitely perverted it from what it once was 10, 20, 30 years ago.
I mean, since you bring up Disney, like if you look at Star Wars in general, when I talk about the nature of a thing, right? So for example, when I talk about the interest and its nature, you can just sum that up in one word if you want to put it really crudely, and that is just brand identity. And the thing is, about the brand identity of a franchise, especially of, like, for example, Star Wars, a story. When you think about like original Star Wars, that was a story that had multiple different like important and central themes. It's stuff like, the inherent corruptibility of mankind, the temptation of easy power, heroism, the idea that, like, no matter how far gone someone looks, deep down there is a core of decency that could flip a switch at any moment and open up the road to redemption. All of those are ideas that have been completely corrupted and lost in this new iteration of the Star Wars franchise. Because again, it's not a franchise that's designed to satisfy those kinds of like those elements that make a story a story. It's just, it really does just look like a bunch of checkboxes being ticked off to like send some sort of message. So yeah.
Real quick, let me answer some of this. Weird says Inquisition, Ordo Puritan versus Ordo Hereticus. Patchouli Days says HSR has a fan base from older games and hence more degenerate. Genshin has more normie Western fan base, so the issue is we clash often. Okay. Can make sense. Wildcat says localizer pushing an agenda is effectively erasing the cultural elements that make it entertaining in the first place. Well, that's part of this poll, right? So obviously, a localizer might be not necessarily a pervert, but might actually be an activist or an inquisitioner. So can you go into that split? Because I don't think you have yet, between activists and inquisitioners, and what the difference is there.
So whereas a pervert is more interested in like a fan in a fan base only because they want to get at the nature of the thing that draws everyone together, an activist is someone who only gets into the fan base because they see the other people in that fan base as a resource to convert to whatever cause they walk in with. So again, this is someone who as other people have put it before, they just look at everything through the lens of, let's say, a single political issue or a single ideology or a single like agenda that they're trying to push. And again, they are incapable of engaging with the material itself or the interest itself, because whenever they look around, they don't see other people, they don't see other fans, they just see possible converts. And again, that is probably what's going on, as Legal Minds had said, with localizers.
Localizers, I think
they're not doing a good job of engaging with the culture that the work comes from. They're not even doing a good job of satisfying the fan base that they're supposed to be catering to. So it really does seem like they're only going in because they want to sort of tell other people how to think, how to feel, etc., etc.
Yeah, and I there's a few of them. Once again, not all, but a few of them that have even been caught saying they actually actively despise anime and despise the community as a whole. So once again, that would fall into that.
Yeah, they might go more into inquisitors, and the distinction between activists and inquisitors is, whereas activists are people who see the fan base as a resource, inquisitors are people who see the fan base as, like, degenerates, just a general guilty party. Inquisitors are just people who walk in with the intention of punishing the fan base around them. They are just people who, for some reason, either walked in hating the fan base or came to resent the fan base after joining for whatever reason. And the example that we gave just then was like, for example, localizers who have said that they hate the anime fandoms, etc., etc.
Yes.
But if you think about it in VTubing, this can be something like, for example, the occasional creator that has a sort of tantrum over the fact that other creators are receiving more success or exposure than they are, and as a result they dedicate their entire careers to sort of tearing down other people, or preying on the downfall of larger creators than themselves. Those are also inquisitors, even though they might look like they've integrated into the space, purely because their interactions with the fan base, their interactions with the community, is defined by their resentment. So
someone brought up in the chat, really good example, the game journalists who hate gamers. That's a really great one.
Yes.
Really good. Haven't played a game in their life and they'd absolutely despise people. That's a really good one. So obviously you've got that tug of war, and somewhere in between, so this spectrum here, so there are minor changes which can happen in either direction, which can be seen as acceptable, right? Or maybe even, like you say, beneficial. It's even possible it could be beneficial, right? So if there was, like, for example, right, I'll give an example in maybe even a 40K context, right? So, like, for example, there's been the big debate over female space marines, right? And there's some people say, oh, we got to diversify this. We've got to add more we got to add more female space marines because we need more diversity, etc. And there's people saying, nope, females were never space marines. It's been explicitly mentioned. It's in the lore. It's never been there. But then they add in a character, and maybe they add a character that's not a space marine. Maybe they're like a sister of battle, but they get their own book and they get a prominent placement. Okay, that's fine, right? That's acceptable because that fits within both the lore, right? So the lore people can be happy, and it adds another character that ticks off a diversity checkbox, right? So it doesn't really offend either. It ends up with an acceptable change, right? Or an acceptable addition to the community, right? So there is an ability for stuff to be okay and for it to be pulled. However, when it gets to an extreme is when there's a problem. So I think we've talked about the extreme of perversion, which is, converting something, like I said, Star Wars, to the point where it's unrecognizable. It has driven away the majority of the people that would support it or were the OGs and purists, right? They've just walked off. They've given up the tug of war, walked away. A lot of the good tourists and spectators have walked away. That's perversion. But can you talk about the depths of puritanism and something going too far on this side of the scale?
So when the purists become too loud of a voice on that particular side of the tug of war, the problem is that the space tends to stagnate. Now, that happens as a combination of the fact that newcomers are routinely dismissed or disincentivized to join. And the problem is newcomers are also some of the people that might have some genuinely good ideas or just have different thoughts on potential weaknesses of a space. For example, when this happened in VTubing, this was when people made the transition between thinking of VTubers as just virtual idols to starting to think of VTubers as more like streamers as well. So again, this doesn't attack the nature of what it means to be a VTuber. It just adds more dimensions onto it, diversifies, in the truest meaning of the word, the possible scope of the things that people can do as a VTuber. And that's a more beneficial change. But that is not a change that would have happened if Puritanism had maintained its reign over the space. And again, when you don't have new people coming in, your hobby, your interest cannot grow. And this is one of the things that I touched on when I talked about this before. But you do want your hobby, your interest, your favorite creators to grow. Not in the same way as you want a company or a corporation to grow, because they have to be beholden to shareholders, line go up, that kind of thing. But you do still want them to grow, because that way they can continue making their content and improve and pursue their own dreams, etc., etc. And the only way they can grow is if new people come in.
Exactly.
So,
That's
yeah.
the only way that you can grow as new people come in. Now, talk about this little bar you have on the side. This one I was a little confused by, and you did explain it in a good way, because I was like, okay, why is this bar? This bar, it's the green little money bar here. It's mostly full. This one's like a little bit more depleted, but it's larger. Like, what's going on with that?
So the way that I conceived it is that both of these sides have a stamina bar, and that stamina bar is dominated by money. Everything comes down to finance, money, how well you can maintain the financial viability of whatever it is you are doing, whatever content you're making, etc., etc. So with the tourists, they have a lower bar, but it refreshes more regularly, because even though there are fewer of them, that little group of people, or that minority of people, keep rotating in and out with new groups that come in with agendas, with their own prejudices or whatever.
And often big sums of money, especially if it's a corporation, they can just come in
Exactly.
and with the ultimate money bomb, just buy out, right? Which is the
Yep.
ultimate money bomb. Yeah.
Exactly. And on the other side, though, with the old guard, you have a higher bar because there are more people, but it refreshes more slowly. Because again, ideally, if you're maintaining your fan base correctly, there won't be a high rate of rotation. Sure, there may be periods of sudden influx, but generally speaking, there shouldn't be a high rate of rotation. So again, the bar is higher, but it refreshes slower. And the reason why, again, the whole thing about growth, the reason why you want new people to come in to grow that fan base is because that is the only way you can increase the height of that stamina bar. You can increase the max capacity of the room you have for it to decay. And what happens when either one of these sides drops off in that tug of war is that whichever side is remaining, that bar starts to decay exponentially faster, because then
Right.
there's no controls in place to maintain that balance of power that you need to maintain the integrity of the interest and its nature. So, yeah.
Yeah, that does definitely make sense. And someone mentioned like one small boss versus small wave enemies. Yeah, it's almost
Yeah.
that way. Like, especially
Yeah.
if it's a very powerful actor or a very powerful corporation, it can almost be like they are the boss you need to defeat, right? And I love it putting it in the stamina bar sense, because it puts it in like an RPG sense of like, okay, you have to win that stamina battle. Which is very true, because it is a long endurance. This is an endurance thing. It's not something that's won by one, usually, typically, these sort of battles are not won by one spicy tweet, or one engagement on social media. They're won in a very long, protracted push or pull, rather, over the objective. Oliver Klozoff says, I feel personally attacked by this. Luke and time you out. No, I'm joking. Rhythm says, where do the elitist of fandoms fit in the tug of war?
I would put them in purists in that particular category, because
Or
again,
OGs,
they are
maybe either a purist or OG, maybe.
a kind of if you were to put those two terms in a Venn diagram, they would be in the middle of that, because they are a combination of people who've usually been around the longest, and they're also people who tend to assert their superiority over people who are just trying to come in. So
yeah, that's definitely a group. Elwin says, I don't think I can be a perv without crossing the line. Here's a true lolicon motto. Lolly is to be protected, giving head pats and candies. I mean, okay. Matt says Doctor Who is now failed for the same reason as Disney Star Wars: agenda and poor representation over good storytelling. Well, the point is, this battle, and the reason why I like Armchair's representation is this is not just for VTubing. Yes, I want to talk about in the VTubing context, because he brought it up in the VTubing context. I brought it up in the VTubing context. That's the thing that I think we were currently talking about. But this applies to everything. This applies to 40K. This applies to Doctor Who. This applies to Star Wars. This applies to Pokemon. This applies to literally every single fandom or community. You can apply this rubric, right?
yeah, pretty much. And again, like you said, I did originally design this to talk about VTubing, but then when I started applying more examples, I realized, oh, okay, yeah, these categories work for again, pretty much any fandom or any particular franchise. So yeah.
Some my local somebody says, no one talks about the power of Moe anymore. I see you. I see you. I see you. Wildcat says, where would clout chasers fall on the scale? I would say a clout chaser would either be a activist, Yeah, probably an activist because they see people as a source of potential clout. But I don't know what you think about that.
I would put them there as well because, again, it doesn't really matter what the cause in question is. The cause could simply be your own brand identity as a creator.
Right.
If you only view a fan base as a possible convert to, like, if you only see the potential followers when you look at a fan base, that definitely does seem like, activist behavior. So
Yes, that absolutely is activist behavior. If you're going in, you're saying, yes, this is ripe, right? Now that said, obviously there's people that are quote unquote purists that end up benefiting, from that, right? But I guess they view primarily the primary thing is the interest in the thing, right? In the nature of the thing over their own personal gain, right? So there are people that do end up gaining, by fighting back, pushing back, right? So I'll think about, folks that all the anti-reviewers, right? So all of the people that are the antis with Star Wars reviewing, right? Or with Lord of the Rings or whatever else that say, hey, look, this newer stuff is a perversion of the old stuff. Well, guess what? If they have a YouTube channel, they actually probably grow. In fact, a lot of those channels are quite big, but they're not doing it, at least in my mind, most of them are not doing it simply for the clout. They're doing it for that. Now, some of them might be. Some of them might be, but
it's a difference of intention there because that happened with the example you just gave. It's more of a byproduct of something they already planned to do as a natural result of like their need to defend whatever their idea of the hobby is. So,
and then like, and the thing is, like, guys, this battle can take place, like, once again, I tried to make most of mine about legal and law and going into this, but the thing is about these, the law can spring up from these. So like this battle can end up in a lawsuit. There can be defamation going on between these two different sides, right? There can be crimes that go on between these two sides. This is why, to me, gatekeeping is very interesting because it's what comes of these things. And obviously, as a business lawyer, right, and business being in corporations being one of the biggest perverts, right? If you're talking about mergers and acquisitions, buyouts, right, doxing, yeah, people brought up doxing as potentially illegal, by the way. In many places, doxing would be illegal because it'd be perceived as a threat. There's so many legal consequences that can come from this battle. Right. So this coverage of the gatekeeping, from my standpoint, there are legal consequences to all of this. And there can be, right, to this battle, right, which makes it interesting, not just from a ideological standpoint, but just also from a business standpoint and from a overall standpoint. So, yeah, this is something that just really, really gets nasty. And it gets even more nasty when we go to this last slide here, slide number 4. Which I have some questions here on this one. This one's a good one.
Yes.
So I'll let you explain this. So you want to talk, I think this one is about defense against bad actors.
Yep. So generally what tends to happen, and this is a trend that's been going on and increasing in popularity over the last, like, let's say around like 10, 15 years, especially, where bad actors will enter a space and their default defense against criticism is holding up their own personal traits and attributes and sort of using that as a shield. So this can be stuff like, their sexuality, their gender identity, their degree of qualification, their race, their allegiance to a larger social cause, or just general movement. And again, the thing is, when they hold those things up as a shield, when they use that as a justification for whatever they've made, however poor in quality it might be, a lot of people may make the mistake of being Pavloved into associating that thing that they're holding up as a shield with the reason why they are behaving the way that they are. So the way that I put it is, never make the mistake of launching a personal attack against a bad actor against like the things that they end up holding up to distract you. Never.
Right, so don't you're saying don't attack them based on the shield.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So again, if they're talking about like, okay, I'm only thinking and expressing myself this way because I was taught to do so in media school as a journalist or whatever, don't make the mistake of thinking, okay, well, that's the only thing I can criticize then, because again, that shield is used to protect a bunch of other like things that you actually can criticize. Things like the fact that they have claims to moral superiority, that they're condescending when they interact with people who've been in the space for longer, the idea that they are like paternalistic in the way that they want to interact with the fan base. So paternalism meaning to restrict someone of their freedoms under the pretext that it's good for them. Then you have things like corporate cynicism, the idea that they're only interacting with something because they believe it can make money, or they only see something as a money-making tool.
Right.
And then on the other side, you have the deficiencies that they're often trying to hide. Things like an absence of creativity or originality, prejudice against, the hobby itself or the people who enjoy it, a lack of technical skill. Maybe they really are just garbage writers who cannot string together a plot to save their lives. Willful ignorance of nuance. So again, the idea that they aren't aware of the various different perspectives or nuances to someone's enjoyment of a thing or a fandom's way of interacting with one another. So they just go in, pretend they don't see anything, pretend they don't need to see anything, and just make judgments and calls regardless. So
yeah, that's actually very, very that's all very, very true. And I guess I do agree with you. You should never attack them on that. One thing I will say though, my initial comment here was, I believe, and I've commented on this before, I think they use that shield as at least a sword, or maybe you could say they give it a shield bash, like I do say like that shield it's defensive. Certainly it's defensive. But
yeah.
I do feel like many times, particularly with the and let me go back here, with the bad tourist crowd, right? That's used as a way to attack. Right. So saying, okay, we are this, you are not this, therefore you are disqualified from your contribution. Right. You don't share our, you didn't get a degree in this. Right. Credentialism. Right. You don't belong to this identity group, whatever that identity group is. Right. You don't belong to this or this political group. Right. You're not a member of BLM, and not the base legal mindset, which you guys can join. We're going to have a BLM level members only stream very soon, very, very soon. But we're talking about other BLMs, and so therefore you can't comment on this, right? Your opinion is invalid, right? It is difficult not to mention it when it's used both defensively and offensively, is what my comment would be. It's very difficult. I do agree with you that you shouldn't, but I do think it is very difficult.
I would agree, because I do very much see how these same traits, even though I did like in the metaphor like phrase it as a shield, I can see how it's often used to like bludgeon people into accepting bad work. So generally the way that I would say generally what tends to happen, and this is specifically when it comes to journalism that I'll be referring to. What will often happen is a publication will put out a bait article, or they will phrase something in a way that is designed to bait people into attacking one of the traits that are like held up on the shield, right? So again, they'll nudge you with it, they'll bludgeon you with it, but they're hoping that when you do retaliate, you will hit the shield and not the things behind it. So I do very much agree that it can be very difficult to ignore those things, but even though it might sound like a suboptimal solution, perhaps the best way of dealing with that kind of behavior, that kind of bad faith advocacy, would just be to point out that that that's what they're doing, to call out that they're doing that. For example, if someone is trying to say, look, you don't have a degree in journalism, therefore you have no right to critique my review of this game, you can point out, okay, that's, again, your credentials are fine, but your takes are still bad, and then point out the reason why those takes are bad, for example. Especially when it comes to like, this is something that we've seen from game journalism in particular, where articles will often be written with the idea in mind that there will be people coming after them because they are a game journalist. You can actually see that start to work its way into the material that articles are actually beginning to incorporate, even just in the writing room. So I think there was an article that was recently released, I think 27th of June, where it was basically we should go back to trusting game reviewers again. And that was an article with an entire basis in just video game reviewers, game journalists are being persecuted by this horrible fan base, glossing over all of the reasons why that fan base might have been put off by the work that they've been putting out for years, and then trying to hold up their credentials and, even in a broader sense, the abuse that they have endured from more, let's say, unhinged members of their potential audience, as a shield from criticism to the fact that they have for years now been trying to insert political agendas in the most ham-fisted way possible into the material they report about, that they have a willful ignorance of the nuance behind why people may be uncomfortable with the idea of political or social commentary, as obvious and ham-fisted as that, in their games, things like being just generally prejudiced against their potential audience, and on top of just being really condescending in general when they come up with whatever they put out. So
yeah, and that is something that you can attack. So you could be like, hey, this guy's a condescending fucking prick, right? That's open, right? That's open for attack, right? You can attack the actual. So maybe you can't attack the education. This is one that you kind of hear, but you can attack a claim to moral superiority, right? Or the foundation of that, saying, well, the underlying point with education would be like, better about the specific thing. Well, okay, well, let's attack the fact that that's maybe paternalistic, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe, or even that lacks technical skill, right? So yes, you went to journalism school, but if you attack the writing itself, saying, look, your writing itself is deficient, right? That undermines your that does undermine that, right? Because obviously if you're holding that up as credentialism and you can't even spell correctly, right? That's a problem.
Yeah, and on top of that, like another reason why this tactic tends to work is that there is always a lie being peddled to the audience that the things on that shield are worth attacking in the first place. Because again, sure, maybe you have a degree in something, but that doesn't mean you are incapable of idiocy. It just means you have more words to put that idiocy into. So like even stuff like, for example, your allegiance to a wider social cause. Let's say, for example, that you are and this is something that's been we've seen this in VTubing before, where someone will say, okay, I'm acting as a horrible community member. I want my favorite VTuber to talk about politics on stream because I care about the Israel-Palestine conflict. Again, just because you care about the Israel-Palestine conflict does not automatically give you a license to proclaim and assert that needs to go into every single stream you come into contact with.
Correct, right? And that was one of the assumptions, is like, hey, we're gonna take this argument, which is an extraordinarily inflammatory argument, and we're gonna put that in literally a VTubers chat, right?
Yeah.
So
exactly.
And this wasn't this a controversy? Am I forgetting? Yeah. Wasn't this a controversy?
This was with Scarlet and Niji Sanji, where some unhinged Twitter user just came into her chat, started trying to get on her ass for eating Starbucks cake, of all things.
And she decides to ban them, which rightly so, and should focus on, hey, I'm banning them for harassing, and being an anti, not necessarily because they're saying, because they're doing this under the guise of pro-Palestine, right? I'm banning them because they're an anti, right? They're coming in there and they're coming in here with prejudice to the chat, right? And they're creating a bad environment. So saying, hey, I don't give a shit about their allegiance. It could be anybody, right? It could be somebody who's pro-Israel, pro-Palestine, pro-Ukraine, pro-Russia. It doesn't matter. If they're coming in here and causing issues in the chat, I'm going to remove them, which, by the way, is the way I conduct my chat. I don't care if you're here on the right or on the left. If you're creating an issue in the chat, like, your ass is out of here, right? It's perspective neutral, right? And that does create the issues, because people tend to try to drag it back, right? Even if Scarlet did ban her, they try to drag it back and point it to that identification, right?
Actually, on the topic of that particular, that breed of anti, the term slacktivist is just it's I love that.
What's the definition of that term? I don't even know what the definition of slacktivist is.
So generally, slacktivism or slacktivist is someone who proclaims to be an activist, but will only take to use a pun, armchair measures of actually enacting whatever social change they seem to be advocating for. They won't do anything that actually has some sort of financial or physical commitment They'll just
Okay.
try to make it as visible as possible to other people online.
So
So-
all of Twitter.
Yeah, pretty much. Yep, pretty much.
Okay.
And the reason why I love Slacktivist as a term so much is because that is the quintessential lazy content consumer, where instead of actually taking the initiative to go out and look for different content creators, different areas of content that will satisfy whatever desires you have to affirm whatever like need you have to like explore a topic or whatever, they'll just go to the same creator and insist that that creator covers all of their particular content needs. And that is just like, that is the most it's hard to even find words to describe how much that is a product of sheer apathy, laziness, and stupidity all rolled into one. But
Keyboard Warrior, people say in the chat, that's a very good one. I've heard that one for years.
Yeah.
That I do agree with, right? The internet or internet tough guy as well. That's a variant, right?
Yeah.
Right. So it's somebody who is willing to threaten you and may say all these things online, but if they were ever confronted, or certainly a lot of times when these folks are exposed in the, like, let's say they engage in some sort of harassment or stalking, and the police show up, then all of a sudden it's exposed. They roll over, right? Let's see here. A couple questions. Hugo XGC said the whole tourist talk reminded me about how Mori Callipy came to HoloLive. I think Rima or Nusagi could explain the whole character progression better. Yeah, I wouldn't say Mori herself was a tourist, right? But
I think,
but yeah,
there was like a pretty big concern, especially among Holo purists, that Mori would bring in more tourists.
Yes.
And you kind of see this quite a bit with HoloLive's fan base in particular. That's not really fair for me to say. Not all of their fan base, but again, the more Puritan members.
Certain elements,
yeah, the more Puritan members, subsections of that fan base, where every time Holo does do something slightly like new, or bring in someone who's slightly left of center of what they expect a VTuber to be, then they will kind of have that sort of initial inflammatory reaction to it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the same thing with even just the Dodgers collab that just happened, where and again, I understand why people are apprehensive about tourists coming in, but ideally, by like giving people these like concepts and explaining this kind of stuff, giving people a model to conceptualize it, I do hope that inflammatory response is maybe not curtailed, but at the very least refined in the way that it manifests when stuff like this happens. So yeah,
and showing that somebody can, people are saying, she didn't like idol culture. Well, you can come in not liking idol culture and still contribute and add something and expand the fan base, right? And that, going back to this right now, that's an acceptable or beneficial change. And I think we can all see in retrospect that, yes, Mori Callipy has had a net positive change on VTubing, right? At least in my opinion. I think that's a fair opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that 100%.
Yeah, so let's see what's Martin Drost for 10 euros says, regarding VTubing, I don't consider fans the problem. It's the people in charge of the companies employing VTubers who should be under a microscope. Every VTuber is an individual that has their own audience. Guys, this is why I put so much attention on the corporate side and the legal side and stuff behind the scenes, because you need to really consider the corporate interests and the investors and all that, because as Armchair said, they're the ones that will end up pulling and perverting and changing the thing. So that's why it's really important to have people paying attention to that, not just the content that's being put out on the face, because what you're not seeing is what may be going on behind the scenes. That's why I go and read the investor reports, right? And those, securities filings, right? Because those can show you, okay, long term, where are these interests going to drag this? Are they going to drag it in a good direction, generally, a bad direction, or just generally, how is that change going to evolve? Because it will evolve, especially if there's a corporation involved.
Yeah. With that particular thing, generally, because of the fact that every VTuber is an individual that has control over their own audience, the problem with corporations is that, let's use Nichi Sanji as an example. When a
Sure.
corporation has outlined to its shareholders that its target demographic now is going to be essentially the Puritan portion of their fan base,
The
that can
Puritan
really get in.
Japanese portion of their fan base.
Yeah, exactly. That can really get in the way of supporting creators in asserting their own boundaries and maintaining the integrity of their own audiences. For example, let's say you are a streamer, a niche streamer that has a lot of unicorns in your fan base, and you'd like to
Mhm.
set boundaries with them so that you don't risk them attacking new people who are trying to enter your particular fan base. If your company tells you, look, I don't want you getting in the way of those unicorns, I don't want you alienating those unicorns, out the window goes your ability to properly regulate that particular fan interaction. So
Well, you got to cater to them now. If you said like, I
exactly, yeah.
want you to not alienate them, that means you have to cater to them. You have to cater to an extremist, right? So
Yep.
if you have to cater to an extremist, it's like, saying you have to cater to a particular religious extremist, right? It's like, well, you can only serve a diet if it complies to the most strict kosher guidelines. I'm just picking something out. Well, then you alienate anyone who would want something that doesn't involve that, right? So you literally can't have both things, right? You have to cater to that. Now, a corporation could do a thing where they segment it off, where they say there's a generation or a brand, right? This brand is catering to X, right? That's possible. And I think to a certain extent, and not to, once again, I like that this has been a broad discussion and we use examples to illustrate, but not necessarily to call out. But I mean, to a certain extent, I see certain corporations like maybe Hololive like has done that maybe better, I would say, of like segmenting out different portions of its audience. But that said, there can be ways you can screw that up and you can end up with a very kind of toxic fan base. Wildcade says, Uki, I'm not racist. They're only white people. This is what I talk about the sword part, right? Like that's how it's like turning it around and saying like, oh, well, I can't be racist because I'm this and you're this, right? Yeah, that's definitely a bash for sure. Oliver Klozoff says, I grew up with, in the response, by the way, to Uki is not to respond to him, being like, to turn around and be like, well, Uki, you're Asian, right? It's to say, well, your content is bad or your point is bad. It's illogical, right? XYZ. Oliver Klozoff says, I grew up with game lobbies that were so toxic, but so much fun. It will never be again. And I lament its passing. My mommy also misses all this. Wait, what?
It's because Game is saying that they're gonna
about your mom. Yeah.
yes.
I was just like, it took a second for that to process. I'm like, wait, what? I'm like, I'm thinking real quick. I'm like, hold on.
Degenerates. You guys degenerates.
Foodala says no need for gatekeeping or culture wars. Just have everyone get Elon Musk's brain chip, integrate all humanity into AI, and become Fanta. Yes, you're talking about the end of Ava VTubing edition here. I also want to bring up, this is something that somebody showed me on Locals, which shout out to my Locals people. There's this old waifu wars meme, which is just great. Obama declares no waifu, no laifu. U.S. China tension over best girl. Putin, a member of Onodara Master Race. Great stuff. George Patton 93 said, holy crap, armchairs letting people know something I and many others have been screaming for years. Do not attack the shield. Yeah, attacking the shield is a Don Quixote-esque effort, right? Because you're never going to break it, right? You're never going to change any of those things, right? And they're never going to, those people that are using it as a defense are not going to stop that. It's going to embolden them, right? Because they're going to be able to point to somebody and say, look, one of those people I told you about, versus if you just try to defeat them with pure logic, or even defeat them by economics, right? By just not investing in the thing. As we see a lot of these game journos right now, Kotaku and other branches closing down. I think they closed their Australian branch, I believe it was.
Yes. Yep.
I
mean, good riddance. As an Australian, I can only be glad that that's happened. But
right. Oh no. Yeah, exactly. And they're like, oh no, 40 hardworking journalists lost their job. I couldn't even keep a straight face past the word journalist because, it was nothing close to what journalism should be, at least. Singer says Maury used to hate idols until she researched it, but she openly admitted this on Trash Taste, and she admitted she was being, and I quote, a jealous hoe. And hi, take some money I didn't spend. Thank you so much. You know what? This is actually really, honestly, I appreciate that, and I will say I have an empathy for people that are open-minded and are open to changing their mind, right? I really do, especially since I can even look at things. Even when I told Armchair Expert this, when he brought this up, even I had some introspection, and I was like, you know what? There's certain times where maybe I might lean into it a little bit more, of at least reflecting upon or ruminating on the shield, maybe not directly attacking it so hard, but at least spending too much time on it when I can spend more time on this other stuff, right? And just reflecting on the balance at which I spend my time. So spending way more time on this, and just maybe, hey, acknowledge, hey, this is up. This shield is up. So we're not going to come for this. We're going to come for all this. Right. And then Hugo says, initially Callie didn't like idol culture, so purists looked at her as a bad actor coming in for her own game, but she proved herself to be genuine. She literally released a harsh anti-BLK company anthem. Wait, really? Wow. That's pretty good. It's pretty good. I gotta listen to that. In fact, Hugo, if you have that song that's like pretty harsh, send that to me. Miku Kumi for 250 Philippine pesos says, reminds me of private equity firms acquiring YouTube channels. Happened recently with an automotive channel, Donut. 2 hosts broke off and many followed them. Donut now sub 1 million views and videos. Yes, this happens with a lot of different things. I mean, by the way, I don't want to make this sound an armchair. I'm sure you agree with me. This is not something that is just on the ideological left or right. Because I think a lot of people, they do try to paint me as some sort of political far right person. But I will go back here and I will say this sort of thing can happen both on the right and the left. So this could be, for example, somebody who's on the right saying, hey, I am a conservative Christian, right? And making a point, right? And attacking their conservative Christianity, right, might not be necessarily the right move there, right? They might be using their Christianity as a shield, right?
Yeah, for sure.
It's possible, just like you could use your identity with any other group, right?
This is definitely not any sort of like, this is something that shouldn't really be viewed through the lens of like bipartisanship or anything like that. Because again, exactly like you said, this is not something that is unique or even, I would say, more prevalent on one side or the other. Because again, if you look at like all of politics as a two-party like spectrum, this is something both sides will use routinely.
Yes, absolutely. They'll 100% do that. They'll say, hey, look, and if anything, they'll use the I am not this as the, so it's like the inversion, right? It's like almost the inversion of this, right? Like I am, anti-woke, right? Therefore you cannot criticize me, or, oh, we're on the same team, or I'm on this particular political party, right? Therefore you can't criticize me. And I'm like, no, fuck you. I am a person who goes issue by issue by issue. I can disagree with people on all sides with all traits over particular issues because I am looking at the actual thing. I am looking at the actual, creativity, originality, skill, practices. Like I'm looking at the thing and critiquing the thing, not the person, right?
Exactly.
So their take is what's shit, not necessarily the person because they are this. I don't have a problem with anybody, regardless of what their sexual orientation or religion or education is. That's fine. Just don't make a bad point, right? And don't try to change something in a way, right? Going back to this, don't try to make a change that will be a perversion, right, of something that I love. Right?
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
Right. Elwin says, we like true diversity, not hypothetical. Yes, I love true diversity. Absolutely. Drisbin says, rip Mano Alloway. It was the OG fans that forced her out, not HoloLive. I don't know that lore. Are you familiar with that lore?
Grima has a video essay on the whole progression of Mano Alloway.
I'll have to go back with. I'll have to go clop on over to Rima's channel and talk to her about that, along with whether or not she is the racehorse that Riku bought out. We'll need to find out the truth. Find out the truth from Rima. Shout out to Rima. Matt says horses in the chat for Rima, guys. Matt says Uki might be anti-white, but he also denied French cuisine is a thing, and I think that's a little based. Yeah, see, exactly. I can agree with him on that. Yugo says overkill is an obvious attack on black companies. Okay, let me look that one up. I'll watch that off screen. I want to on my next so this is something I want to do on my maybe member stream. There's a couple of like really cool music videos, and including some like fan-made music videos. I found this Fuamoko diss track of Hollow Justice that's like really cool. It's like really good. And like I'm gonna listen to that on a member stream, not on this stream. We're keeping it professional. I don't want anybody to, for armchair here. I want to keep it nice and respectable. But we'll do that in the future. Yeah, he's a gentleman here, and he's presenting very unbiased information. So armchair, how like to give people a little preview, because you are going to talk about this further, right, on your stream. And on your channel, do you want to give people maybe a little teaser? Not the whole kit caboodle, but a little bit of a teaser on how you're going to expand on this and some other things you're going to talk about. Yeah.
So, I'm going to be introducing a few other media concepts that tie into the whole practice of gatekeeping, how communities sort of gather around a central creator or area of interest, the different kinds of like categories that you can split that community into, the way you want that community to evolve, as well as getting into some of the differences between like how gatekeeping would work depending on what it is you're trying to gatekeep: an event, a community, a franchise, an industry, and just in general trying to really flesh out the ideas that I've already brought up, but in a way that is a little bit clearer, because I had more time to sort of put all of this together and articulate it properly, because I really do value that clear articulation of things. So yeah, and it's good to have that, especially to be able to pull this out. And I plan to pull this out. My Clipper, hey Clipper, clip this part out. To have this out as a standalone thing to go back and reference to, say, hey, you guys, if you ever want to talk about like the gatekeeping nuance of this gatekeeping argument, go back over here and check out this video I did with Armchair, because I think this is probably going to be like the quintessential, at least until we have a future conversation about it. But also, what's quintessential, Armchair, you're now at 7K. I saw you just got bumped up to 7K. So thank you guys for helping Armchair get up there to 7K. Maybe we can get him to 8K at some point, or 7.5. Let's get him up there. But appreciate you guys subscribing to that, liking that video, and also make sure you like this video. 840 of you watching right now. Make sure you like this if you like these interviews and you like these conversations, where I can have these sort of very professional, very almost academic, but I say that in the classical way, conversations that go into the substance of a thing and like what really is this at its core on a broader extrapolation. I truly enjoy that, and it's been a really good conversation, I'm sure. Same for me. I'm really glad that I was able to talk this out with you, and I really appreciate all of you guys watching this as well. Yeah.
So guys, on that note, that's what we got for today. Just a quick civil conversation here with Armchair. I will be back tomorrow. Probably tomorrow is when I'm going to do my BLM episode, unless there's other news or things going out. I thought about watching the Baldwin trial, but it would involve me being up really late at night, and I've got a lot of work to do, so I probably will not do that. It also seems kind of be boring from what I've seen so far. So that's not going to happen, but it will have a BLM stream that'll happen. And I do have a quick clip on the way out that was suggested by my viewers, which was Crony did the Monogatari tongue twister. So we'll play this clip on the way out, guys.
Cool old timer. Oh yeah, I've seen this request. Nyanya me nyanya ji nyanya dono nyara bide nyaku nyaku inyaku nyaku nyanya ha nyanya dai nyanya ku nyanya bete nyaga nyaga me. Yeah, I'm pretty good. How did you nail that? It's because I'm a cat. I was actually thinking about like uploading this separately, like the whole tongue twister. Yeah.
That's pretty impressive. That is
That was
actually
amazing.
You can't say that. You can't say they're not talented, guys. Let's see. That was a nice Bella talk. Thank you. Thank you. That said, guys, make sure you subscribe to Armchair. Take care, and never forget the
long